Hey YouTube, here's Heiko.
Yeah.
We're down in my garage today and I'm working on getting my tire balancer ready to balance my front wheel on my R90/6 BMW. It has a little bit of a bounce to it. This was balanced before, but I think it's because of the poor quality of my tire balancer, or wheel balancer I should say, that this balancing didn't turn out. Here, let me show you what I'm talking about. Problem with those Harbor Freight Pittsburgh wheel balancers are those bearings here on the side. They use pretty much the same size of bearing that you find in like roller skates or inline skates, whatever you want to call them, and they don't roll really well. I've even replaced some of those bearings. I have taken the rubber seals out of the bearings to make them roll a little easier. Then I blow them out, then I lubricate them with very thin oil, and it still doesn't roll really well. And you can only get a good balanced wheel out of the whole process if your bearings here have as little resistance as possible, so that if the wheel is not balanced, the heavy point of the wheel will always fall to the bottom. If there's too much roll resistance or too much resistance in those bearings, then you will not achieve that, and your balancing of the wheel will not work out really well. So I have balanced this before on this stand with this axle and with this sleeve. This is a modification, so this is a sleeve that I put on there, 17 millimeter OD and 1/2 inch ID. But the bearings, these little wheels here that's supposed to make it roll really smoothly, they just suck.
So we're going to use the old Harbor Freight wheel balancer and modify it so that it will accept a Marc Parnes products for motorcycles. Really cool wheel balancers for all kinds of different motorcycles: Aprilia, BMW, Can-Am, Ducati, Harley, and Buell. And he makes really high quality stuff. Those wheel balancers are made so that you can literally put them in a case and take them on a trip.
So here goes. My little angle iron, not painted yet. They need a little bit more deburring, I guess. Is now a platform for the marcparnes.com balancer, which, like I said, he makes adapters. I will put a link down below. I also have a set of universal adapters. These are just, again, the cones similar to what the Harbor Freight came with. This is used for maybe more modern motorcycles, you know, that have sealed bearings right on the outside of the hub, where you can just push this cone into. So I bought those as well, so that I'm a little bit more universal. I can not just work on 1970s airheads, but also other motorcycles. But now the important part is that we're going to do one balancing of a front wheel of my motorcycle together. I show you how I do it, and then you can adapt that to your own way of doing things. So now we just need to take a wheel out. I've already put my bike on center stand. On those old 1970s airheads, the front wheel is always off the ground, so it's pretty easy to pull that out. You don't have to do anything else. So to take the axle out of this /6, this is a 17 millimeter axle. Some older models had a 14 millimeter axle, but the way of uninstalling the axle really is no different. You need a 22 millimeter wrench to take big old nut loose here on this side, on the left side of the motorcycle, and then take nut and washer off. And then you have here at the bottom of the fork those clamps that clamp onto the end of the axle. That is a 6 millimeter Allen wrench, and you just take those loose. You don't need to take them out. This is really just clamping onto the axle. You take both loose. And once it's loosey-goosey, you should be able to pull the axle out. And then I just usually just support the wheel. There are some spacers, at least on one side is a spacer that's most likely going to fall out here in a second. It's that one. And then I just slide it out of my calipers. You can swing those calipers apart a little bit. I have two, so I have one on the right, one on the left. You just swing them outside a little bit so that you can get your tire through. It's still a little on the tight side. Let's make some more space here. So there you go. And then, hello, there it is. So fully assembled in the bike, it looks like this. Hello, like that. This little step here goes right up against this top head spacer, and on the other side you will have this spacer sleeve that goes up against the top head spacer right there. And then nut and washer, and the two clamping mechanisms on the end of the fork are here and here. I just wanted to talk about the problem with a Harbor Freight or a universal style wheel balancer one more time. So here's the axle. It's 1/2 inch, which is 12.5 millimeters, but the axle that's usually in here is 17. As you can see, this has a lot of play. And then if this universal balancer comes with those cones, they only slide on here. They have a little set screw on the side, and then you wedge this cone into, this looks like it's the bearing, but it isn't. It's just a spacer, and this spacer here is really not supporting the weight of the wheel. The bearing is a little further down in there, and if you wedge an axle that is too small with this cone in here, and then you put it on the stand, the whole top head spacer is going to be pushed out of its centered position. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it moves because it's really only held in place with the seal here. It's the bearing seal. Pushes this out of the way until the axle actually gets supported by the bearing. So that's why I ended up making the spacer here, spacer sleeve, that fits pretty snugly over the axle and then fits inside the bearing pretty nicely, so that the weight of the wheel actually gets supported by the bearing and not by the spacer here. And then I drilled out the end of my cones so I can stick that over here. So now let's take Mr. Marc Parnes without dropping anything on the ground here. So you gotta take one bearing off, and usually they have those little plastic rubber caps on the end that kind of hold them in place, and then one of those adapters. Then we stick it through from the other side. And then, as you can see, the axle is also not the right size, but the spacers are made to slide right in there and support the wheel. And then you try to center it out so that the wheel will end up in the middle of the axle. And then they have those hint set screws here, one here and one on the other side. We can even make it so that one is pointing this way, and on the other side I have them pointing opposite direction so that it will not interfere with our balancing here. And then you take the bearing and that little rubber cap, and then we can place the wheel on our fabricated stand here. Kind of like so. The bearing, like I said, they have one flat spot, so you can put them on whatever you have available. Could be a set of jack stands. All right, so here we go. As you can see, my wheel is already doing the spin-a-majigger here. So I have the spacers all the way pushed in. Both of those set screws are tightened. The bearings are sitting on a flat surface. And now I'm going to get a flathead screwdriver, and I'm going to remove all the weights that we currently have on there, because we want to start from scratch. They just slide over the spoke nipple. They clamp on, and then centrifugal force when the wheel is spinning will keep it from coming off, that's for sure. So you don't have to have the ones that have set screws in them. These ones here are available in different sizes. I don't know exactly what the weight is. I could get my scales from. So they make them really small, medium size, a little bigger, and then really those big chungus here. So now I have the wheel without, let's check one more time, without any weights on it. And now you can literally just put the wheel here in the stand, let go of it, and the heaviest spot of the wheel will fall to the bottom. And this only works if those bearings here have as little resistance to spinning as possible. So now it wiggles itself into the position where the heaviest spot is at the very bottom of this setup here. And then once we have figured this out, we know what the heaviest spot is, then you literally want to put a weight at the opposite side. And usually you start with a small weight, you know, find something that's small and lightweight and add that. So something like this, or maybe one notch larger, or then this one, or that one, anywho. So now we're pretty good. We see that the heaviest spot is right where our valve stem is. So then literally the opposite side is right around here. And that's where we're going to add some weight now. And you don't have to crank this on really hard. You just take it, pick a spoke that you want to put it on, and you just wiggle it on. And then what I do is usually, that was our heaviest spot, this was our lightest spot, I just put it at a horizontal and let go of it. And then as you can see, we're again going that direction. So this heaviest spot is still heavier than what we put in on up there as a weight. So now let's just let it spin out until the heaviest spot is again established. I'll pause you in the meantime. You don't have to watch the wheel spin here. So the wheel has stopped swinging. I got my little scale so I can tell you what those weights are actually weigh. Heaviest spot is still the valve stem. Lightest spot, or the opposite, is still up there. So we're going to take this one off here, if I can. And we're just going to put a larger one on there. Let's just see. So the one I just took off is a 15.6 gram. And now I'm putting on the one that I just dropped. Oh, that's the same size. Okay, let's, this is the same. What's this one? 14.9, also 15 grams. So I guess I will have to use the big chungus here. That's 20 grams. So the biggest one goes back on where I just took a 15 gram off.
I sped this part of the video up quite significantly just to show you how tedious this process can be. So you start out with one weight, then you add another one, then suddenly it's too much weight, and then you have to find another weight combination that gets a little closer, and then it still wants to start spinning even slowly, even if it's just a little bit, but you are just focused on getting this perfect. And then you see me changing the positions of the weights, and I'm moving them around. And then eventually I ended up finding a combination of weights and a positioning of those weights that actually worked. The whole goal is that you want to get this static balancing done to the point where the wheel is weight-wise balanced out. Of course, there are other factors that play into a smooth rolling wheel, which is the quality of the tire the installation of the tire. Maybe your tire has a little bit of a lump to it that doesn't show up in the weight equation, but it's still a lump or a little bump, and you can't really do anything about it. So it's actually always a good idea to look for tires that have a high speed rating. Tires that have a higher speed rating are not just stronger to hold up to the forces for higher speed riding, but they are also manufactured to higher standards or to higher tolerances, or I should say smaller tolerances. So they are more round. They have to be more round than, a tractor tire. And so get the highest speed rating that you can get the highest quality tire that you can get, and then take your time with your Marc Parnes balancer and get it just so. You want to be able to place this wheel in any position and it's stationary. It doesn't shovel around. It doesn't spin around. And here at the very end, after 30 or almost 40 minutes of grueling work with this balancer, I managed to achieve that. So be patient, play around with it, and you will get it.
All right, guys, many hours later, I actually have started all over again, took all the weights off, did the whole thing one more time. I can get it down to very little movement. So it wants to stay in most places without, telling me that it needs more weight somewhere. So this is pretty good. Now I just looked up the torque settings for front wheel spindle retainer. That's the axle nut, 40 to 50 Newton meters. And then the front wheel spindle clamp bolts, all models up to 1980, that's 15 to 17 Newton meters. So 45 to 50, 15 to 17. This is really the only thing we need. Before I put my wheel back in my bike, I'm going to clean the front forks a little bit. And I will also degrease the brake rotors and clean the rim a little bit. So one last thing that I want to point out. So I just degreased my brake rotors, and then I also looked at if the brake pads are still in proper location. You got to make sure that this clip here, this diaper needle, is still in its proper location on both sides, so that when you put the wheel back in here, that you don't bump this out of location. This is what kind of, until the rotor is in place, this diaper needle here kind of holds this brake pad in place. So that needs to be where it is. So just pay attention to that you don't bump it off. Another thing that you can do when you have your wheel out, which I'm going to do here, this is a little tool. If I find the link to who makes this, I'll put it down in the description. This is to grease up the tapered roller bearing that are in here. You just need to insert this in there. It has two O-rings that kind of blocks the grease from going anywhere other than into the bearing. And then you just put your grease gun on it and give it a couple squeeze. And you do that with each side, and then of course you can do that on your rear wheel as well. You want to make sure that this grease nipple is clean, and also the tip of your grease gun, so you're not introducing any kind of contaminants in there. So I'm just going to do 2 pumps, I think, maybe 3. And now we're just going to flop this around and do the same over here. Rotor brake is a piece of a helicopter, sorry about that. Brake rotors, that's what I meant. Clean, degreased. So let's keep it that way. Wipe off all the excess grease here from the hub. Grease out of my tub here for just greasing up the axle a little bit, so it doesn't rust. That's more or less what it's for. And that if any kind of corrosion happens, that it doesn't get stuck in the wheel. So that's it. Okay. So with two calipers, it's a little more difficult than with one. And my diaper needles are both still in position. Then we just need to get the calipers moved inward a little bit so that the gap between the brake pads and the rotor line up like that. And then we're gonna lift it up a little. Like that. Then we're going to start sticking the axle in here. Okay, and then before you stick it in too far, let me move you around. As I mentioned, you have this spacer that needs to go between the wheel and the left side fork. So you just need to wiggle it until you can get it right in there. And then we just need to get the axle all the way through. Then washer and nut, 45 to 50 Newton meters. 22 millimeter socket. And you have to hold the other end here. There's a hole in the axle. Just stick a screwdriver through. Okay. And then 15 to 17 is for those clamp bolts here. Okay. Okay. So, and then as a last safety precaution, so that on the side of the road you can check if your axle nut is still tight. What I usually do is like degrease it with brake cleaner. Then I take a white marker. This here is a welding.com Hobart industrial paint marker. I just make a line on the top, so somewhere where you can see it, so that you would notice if that has come loose. So that's it. Clean, axle greased, the bearings greased up with that little tool. I don't remember, it's one of those little shops that make tools specifically to airheads. I just forgot what it's called. So now we have a relatively well balanced front wheel. We have clean brake rotors. Now of course you can try your brakes. I just thought of maybe flushing the brake lines and put some new brake fluid in there, but I just did that last year, so we don't want to overdo it either, right? So that looks good. All right, and now it's just time for a little test ride to see whether or not anything is still hopping or wobbling. All right, guys. So that's it. That's balancing with a Marc Parnes wheel balancer. I will eventually do the rear wheel as well, just to, double check. If you like it, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel. Take care. Bye.